Breakthrough Real Estate Investing Podcast, episode 108.
Welcome back to the Breakthrough Podcast, everybody. Sandy, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm awesome today. You?
I am doing great. I am inside the air conditioning, but it is roasting hot here where I am. Finally made it on that trip I've been talking about for who knows how long. So we've been in Costa Rica. This is the last day. Then I got to come home tomorrow. So it has been fun though. I've been more adventurous than normal. I didn't do the resort thing this time. Just, went and stayed at an Airbnb and did some cool adventure stuff, that typically wouldn't do with the kids, right? They're getting older, so makes it easier, but it's been fun.
Cool.
How about you?
Costa Rica seems to be a haven for real estate investors these days.
Yeah, I'm going to look into that when I get back. Actually, I wanted to see if the place had potential first. I'm in Jaco Beach, and it seems to have quite a bit of potential, actually. It seems to be up and coming right now.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, congrats. Hopefully you enjoy the trip. Nice to be able to do some, maybe it's not nice, but nice to be able to add some value still to our audience while you're away.
Yeah.
So
it's been a slow work week, so I don't mind.
I'm sure. So as our guest here is standing by, we're going to get to him in just a minute. But first of all, I wanted to remind everyone to jump on over to our website, breakthrough.reipodcast.ca. Download our free report there, the ultimate strategy for building wealth through real estate, and you get on our email list that way and get updated on all of our events and things going on. Rob's property tours that he does out in his area, and all sorts of events that we got going on. So get on that list so you never miss out. And also get on over to iTunes. What can they do on iTunes for us there, Rob?
It'd be cool if they rated and reviewed the show over there. So that is a good place where people can pick up on which podcasts are good, have good information. And there's other ones, but come on over and check ours out and give us a rating and review, and 5 stars, or let us know what maybe things that you think we can improve on, or guests that you'd like to hear on the show.
But don't complain about the audio content with Rob being away. And always,
not right now. Not this time, no.
So
although I can see you don't have your stuff on today either.
Well, I figured, we're going to go old school. We'll go old school.
Old school, yeah. We'll all do it.
Yeah. Well, we do have our guest here standing by, Kyle Pulis. Welcome to the show, Kyle.
Thanks, guys.
I'll give everyone a quick rundown on a little bit of his background here before we jump in. But Kyle has over 12 years of senior operations experience in real estate. He's got a passionate commitment to maximizing returns passion and commitment to maximize returns form the cornerstone of Kyle's leadership role as co-founder of Pulis Investments. He's an investor, and Kyle knows the importance of being first, being best, and going the distance. With an eye for location, Kyle's first out of the gate identifying and filling gaps in the underserviced markets. And he's got an instinct for design and renovation, which allows him to take the lead in those markets with desirable multifamily residential purchases. And his expert approach to project management, building efficiency, and tenant relationships give him the wherewithal to maintain and grow that lead over time. Kyle's been a member of and a regular contributor in the past with REIN, also a speaker there. He sits on the advisory board in addition, he sits on the executive board of the Brampton Downtown Development Corporation, and he holds a business degree from Wilfrid Laurier, and he's also actively served in the Canadian Armed Forces as recently as 2013. So a whole bunch of cool stuff there, Kyle. Anything else to add to that list of accomplishments?
No, a bit of a mouthful there.
Yeah.
It's been a journey. I'm sure we'll get the rest of it through the podcast.
Yeah, I appreciate you being here, Kyle. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, no problem.
So I guess we'll jump right in. Tell us about a little bit more about yourself, I guess, and how you ended up getting into real estate investing.
Okay. This could be a story that takes us way into the wee morning hours here. So stop me when I've said too much. But real estate has been something that's become obviously a significant part of my life over the last 15 or so years. It was something that was introduced to me when I was around 15, 16 years old. My family owned a furniture store growing up. And my dad has been an entrepreneur and a businessman forever, and kind of raised me to be much of the same. So I always had a keen interest in business and anything really that involved, turning something that you buy for $1 and making it into 2 or 3. So I always had an interest in the business of sorts and investing and whatnot. So it was pretty natural for me to follow along with whatever my dad was doing at the time, and his interests were similar. So in the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, my dad became really upset with the returns he was getting on his RRSPs. He had made an investment in for one of my little cousins years before, and around that time realized that after it being in that account for 10 years, it had pretty much made nothing. And his RSPs kind of did a very similar trend. And he started to look out into the investment space as to what other opportunities there were in the world. And that's kind of what introduced him into real estate. That and a number of networking groups like REIN and Raymond Allen and a number of other groups that were all sort of real estate oriented. That kind of started, I'm going to call it our family's journey into real estate. My dad had that initial inclination to get in and kind of learn a bit about it. And I naturally followed him behind. So my dad would read a real estate book or a finance book like Rich Dad Poor Dad, leave it on the coffee table. And then, me at 14, 15, 16 would just pick it up behind him and begin reading it. And every breakfast and or dinner or car ride up to the cottage or a hockey game, I'd be picking his brain on the questions I had from that book. So that was kind of the start of what got us into real estate. Quickly, my dad began getting actually active into real estate, buying a couple single family homes in St. Catharines that he converted into student housing. And I would spend my summers up there with him, and we'd be, doing the renovations and or planning what we thought would be the best layout and or business opportunity for that house and how we could get it rented and whatnot. So again, when my dad started getting into real estate around 2000, 2002, I was right there and beside him trying to learn as much as I could. It was interesting at that point, although I didn't have the full perspective to really see the power of real estate and how it was going to transform our life and our future going forward. But it was something that at the very least I could see and understand, because real estate is something that is quite simple. The money coming in on a monthly basis, he would break out for me, these were the expenses, and then, show the monthly cash flow at the end of the day. Now, obviously those numbers are all projections, and you learn that pretty quick in real estate, that there's what you think is going to happen, and then everything sounds good on paper, but then there's the actual practical portion of managing the assets over that course of time and renting them out and everything, where you learn the difficult points of being a real estate investor. But nonetheless, it was a really good experience working alongside him and learning from the grassroots beginnings as to how real estate works.
So how old were you at this point in time, I guess, when you picked up those first couple of properties?
Oh, like grade 9, 10, 11.
So you're involved just from the perspective of seeing what's going on. So at that point. So let's talk about.
You know what? My dad, I mean, a little more. My dad was phenomenal, and this is something that I want to, pass down with my boys. Is my dad was incredible at taking the time, knowing my interest level, and breaking out all of the steps, and kind of including me in on the strategy and the decision making, even on his part, right? So here he is looking at properties that agents are selling him or pitching him. He's running the numbers, but as he's running the numbers, and let's be honest here, he had never bought a property before, so he had as many questions about this as I did, but he was kind of including me in on the thought process and the questions that he had and why he had those questions. So, it was a huge learning experience for both of us together. But the fact that he was including me in on that, one, he was a sounding board for me, but two, you know how the old adage goes, it's like, if you want to learn something, have someone asking you a million questions, right? So I think that helped him as well. So we were really young as far as, my starting in this, and it was a really, really good experience at that beginning stage, getting having the ability for my dad to include me as he did and get so nitty gritty into the thought process there.
Okay. So you learned a lot from him, and that's great. Like, that's invaluable now for you starting out on your journey. So what was the first place that you bought?
Absolutely. So so after high school, I went to Laurier, as Sandy mentioned, for school. And at that time, my dad probably had about 3 or 4 under his belt. And he saw the opportunity there as much as I did at that point, where just like every other university student that moves away for home, you spend first year in residence, and then from that point on, they kind of kick you out of res and tell you to go and find student housing in and around the vicinity of the school. So in first year, my dad and I discussed going in together on a property instead of me going off and renting from some property owner in the area, for me to go off and get my feet wet and buy my first property. So my dad lent me. I'm going to say lent me. He didn't lend me. He was a joint venture partner in buying a duplex in Waterloo there with me. And he kind of threw me to the sharks, to be honest. I rented it to my friends, and the upstairs was rented to my friends, and the bottom portion of the duplex was rented to individuals I didn't know, but same age and became friends over time. But I had absolutely no clue what to do on a property management level of things, because that obviously wasn't anything I had experience with before. And he kind of just gave me the keys to the place and let me drive, and it was a wild ride. And I'll get into this just for those that are thinking of doing a similar thing with their kids. As much as it was a great learning experience, managing this property on my own and managing a student house at that age, I would definitely ask others to reconsider the thought of having myself as the owner live in it amongst the other students. The problem with student housing, as we all know, and especially now, is that tenants seem to think that it's more of a hotel than a rental. And when you're neck deep into midterms or exams, and you have your friends / tenants coming up to you about some issues with the house, and it's 2 a.m. and you got a midterm the next day, it's really hard, one, to ignore them, but it's also hard to really study. So for others that are looking at doing something similar with their kids, I fully support the idea of getting into a joint venture with them and getting them to actively involved in managing them, but try and do it in a scenario where they're not having to live in and amongst the house and the tenants, because especially as a first time real estate investor, because it's a really difficult spot to put the kid in. But anyways, that was my first real estate experience. It was a really tough one, but obviously one I got through and learned a lot from.
You know what? That's a good point. And I think a lot of us do put ourselves through unnecessary pain in the beginning, but you probably wouldn't trade that, right? That experience that you got with it.
Oh, hell yeah.
Looking back on it, right, is invaluable. You knew not to do it again.
Yeah. No, I mean, I walked over coals so I could warn others not to. It's again, it was a great experience as far as managing a building and learning it, but I could have, gotten the same experience managing a house 2 doors down and living in another one with my friends, right? And that's really the important part. At that stage, with young kids that want to get into it, the important part is like throw them into the mix of it, right? Like get their hands dirty, have them go off and do a lot of the property management. We can get into kind of recommendations and that stuff later, but no, it was definitely an invaluable learning experience and something that certainly helped support the future growth and confidence that I had getting into stuff later on.
And so now going forward from there, what's your investment journey like now? What are you into now, or what have you done since then, leading up to today?
Sure. So we had that property. My dad, while I was in university, my dad continued to build up his own portfolio, bringing in a couple of family members or friends to act as JV partners, kind of started dabbling into partnerships. And by the time I graduated in 2008 with a business and finance degree, he had about 25 units at the time. and that was kind of all we thought we were going to be doing, just buying a couple properties here and there, and him having his portfolio and kind of go off into the sunset. And I was supposed to go into the finance world, and on Bay Street or Wall Street or something of the sort was my intention. But then the crash happened in 2008, and I couldn't get a finance job if my life depended on it. So I had a lot of free time sitting there over that year. And by mid winter / spring of 2009, after trying unsuccessfully to get jobs for quite a while, I approached my dad and I said, listen, I got a few years here where I'm going to be probably sitting on the sidelines waiting for the economy to recover. Why don't we put our brains together here and see if we can start a real estate investment company? What we're going to do is, at that time, my dad was semi-retired. He had retired from the furniture store a few years before, had a partner running it. He had become a business coach, where he had become a bit of an expert in coaching property management and other investment companies, like ones that we've created since, as a business coach, and kind of did that part-time. So my request for a partnership was kind of, it was a difficult one for him to take on because he had a really good lifestyle going at that point. But the opportunity I posed to him was, listen, I need an old man with a gray beard and some credibility and experience to come on the team and help me raise capital. And I'm willing to give up 50% of the company for this. And what'll happen though is I'll do pretty much all the work afterwards. Like, you just go off, help me raise the capital and act as my mentor and whatnot throughout the process, help kind of guide me into creating this company. And within 5 to 7 years of you helping to support me, I'll send you back off into retirement, and you'll be just as free as you are now. So that was the agreement we made. We started Pulis Investments in the beginning of 2009, again, with the intention of going off and raising investment capital to support and allow others in the community. At that time, it was really we were just looking at our immediate community, to have them enjoy the benefits we had seen and realized could be possible in real estate, right? Again, I'll caveat this with, we found real estate as a means to create a real investment opportunity for ourselves. And it started off with a need for our own cash to go off and actually make money, because nothing else was providing it at that time, right? So we truly saw ourselves as kind of white knights going out to others and offering the opportunity for them to join in on this, what we considered to be a gold rush essentially at that time, which was to go off and actually invest your money into something that was going to make money. So anyways, that year we started it, we probably we raised a bunch of money from friends and family who had seen what we have done in the past and wanted to include themselves in it. We did a bunch of joint ventures that way. Pretty much doubled our portfolio in the first year, and began to really gain a hold of kind of the business structure and what we should and could be doing. From there, we got into limited partnerships. I was in Edmonton at a conference one day, and I heard Thomas Byer from Invest Plus. No, that's a different one. Thomas Byer's prestigious properties, speaking up on stage of how he owned about $120 million worth of property. And I couldn't fathom the concept of how he would do, the physical closings on those properties, on that amount of properties with the conceivable amount of investors he had, like the logistics involved in what my experience had been at that point, of bringing on 1 or 2 investors and trying to close a deal. I couldn't even, conceive as to what he was possibly doing through. So I had to go and figure out what was he doing different than we did. And that's where I found the investment structures of limited partnerships with the GPLP structure, where we were able to bring in, hundreds or thousands of investors, RRSP eligible, cash eligible, and bring them all and pool them all into one big fund, and then take those dollars and go off and buy real estate as a whole. That was a huge transition in our business model from that point. And from there, we went from essentially raising capital from friends and family to now the general public. So that obviously came with a ton more scrutiny through the OSC and a lot more of a kind of a lot more responsibility and work in the legal aspects of everything that goes in around it. But at the same token, allowed us to go off and expand our business model, in multiples after that.
Can you go a little deeper on the limited partnership model and what that looks like and how you structure that? If someone's wanting to do that themselves, like how do they do that? I think for most people, it probably seems a little daunting. So is there any tips or strategic advice around that?
Yeah, and it can be. So there's two ways to really do a limited partnership. One is with friends and family that you already know. It's a terrific way where you do a GPLP structure to gather friends and family or close business associates, whatever it may be. So it could be one or two investors, doesn't really matter. But what it is that it's a very clear and efficient way to bring investors into a partnership where the general partner is essentially a managing partner, where they carry off the day-to-day duties of managing the assets and their responsibility of taking care of the investment and profit share distribution and cash distribution and everything you would normally see in a joint venture partnership agreement is held up into the GP. And then that GP has a partnership agreement with the LP, which is where all the investors are held. Okay. So it's, as far as just creating an LP GP on that very simple front, it's no more work than creating a joint venture contract. But yet it's exponentially more efficient tax wise, as well as as far as the relationship goes and the duties and responsibilities, it's much more clearly broken and a much more professional way to do it. The other huge benefit of that is on a joint venture contract, you're trying to tie 2-3 individuals together, and there's no real way to tie many, if you're bringing on a number of investors together, where this allows all of those investors just to pool into one LP as the money partners, and then the GP or the person who's leading the joint venture would sit in a GP position, and it's just that much more clear. Anyways, the expanded version of that gets considerably more complicated, and the reason is that once you decide you want to raise capital from the retail space and or essentially people that you've never met before, now and you want to be allowed to market your investment to that general public. Essentially, it's the same LP GP scenario. The problem is not the problem, but the next thing is that you have now the OSC that wants to intervene between the two of you, and rightfully so. So the securities commissions across the country have come together, and what they've said is, like, if you're an investor and you want to offer an investment opportunity, we are going to place an exempt market dealer between you and the investors, and that exempt market dealer is going to have the relationship with the individual investors and act as an advisor to them, as to much like a financial advisor would, where they would take on the responsibility of looking at their portfolio, their investment portfolio and suitability, and declaring if your investment for them is suitable. So it eliminates the ability of unscrupulous investors, real estate investors, going to Nanny across the street and telling her this is a great investment opportunity, even though she's got 3 years to live and the timeline on your investment's 10 years, right? So it really cuts out a lot of that. I don't want to get too detailed in it, because honestly, we get into the nitty gritty of it. It could take all night, but it's basically the difference is putting the exempt market dealer in between, and now having them in place, you can raise capital with an OM offering memorandum in place on your fund. You can go off and raise capital from across the country.
Okay, well, that sounds cool. That's very cool. Congratulations for getting to that point too. That's a big accomplishment, I think.
Yeah, thank you. It was
Now, let's talk about your side of the business then. Who's responsible for what roles in your business?
So, I mean, things have grown. As I mentioned at the beginning, our agreement between my dad and I was to send him back into retirement, and we're proud to say that that happened a few years ago. I mean, he's still active in the company. He deals with special projects, sits on our board, and is an advisor for me when I need one, and or need someone to bounce ideas off of and make some strategic decisions. But more or less, he's taken more of a retirement role and is enjoying the sun in Florida most of the year. I deal with, essentially, I look at my role now. So just for some scope and scale and some perspective here, we got about $100 million worth of assets. Now we probably have about 15 full-time employees. We have, another, 15 or 20 individuals that we support, whether like financially through, contract positions and or guys that are like boots on the ground, out of the office sort of thing. So we got a really wide team here. I've broken the company up into a number of different separate companies. So we have Drake Property Management, which was a company we actually started way at the very beginning. That company obviously runs all of the property management aspects of it. So I have an individual, Gary, he runs Drake Property Management. We also have a company called Four Corners, which is a private lending and acquisitions company. That company goes off, and the market's so tight right now in real estate and finding properties, especially multifamily. So that company's sole focus is to go off and find private, go direct to the owners of buildings across the province here, and convince them to sell, essentially. Work with them and trying to work out an arrangement where they'd be willing to sell their buildings. And either we'll absorb that, we'll buy them personally in our personal family portfolio, we'll buy it through one of our investors, or we'll wholesale those buildings out. So I have some individuals that run that. So I mean, really at the end of the day, we're really breaking things apart to a point where I've taken, at the beginning, I was anything and everything to the company, managing all aspects. And as we've been able to grow, I've been able to find some, very skilled and passionate individuals to start downloading, the 200 responsibilities and titles that I was carrying on in myself, so that now I can focus on our forward trajectory, right? My goal is to, see the problems coming on our, on the macro level of our business, and solve them before they become problems. Also to look at our future and see what the future trends are going to be economically, and or in the real estate world, and figure out, how are we going to capitalize on the opportunities that I see, forthcoming, right? And then to make, and it's really, my job is, and they describe it to me in the office this way, it's like, I'm like the hedgehog, right? Like burrowing into the sand, trying to find the gold nuggets. And my team's job is to kind of follow in behind me wherever we're going and shore up the walls, right? I'm constantly bringing us into new opportunities, into new avenues or like areas of investing. And it's my team's job to follow in behind and make sure all of the big details, and all of the, the scary risk factors that are associated to these new ventures and or growth of the company, are taken care of, and making sure that everything's going to be, on a solid footprint going forward.
Cool. So it's a business, whereas I think a lot of real estate investors are definitely starting out. It's not necessarily all that organized and structured. It sounds like obviously you've put together a lot of systems in there to fine tune it and allow for opportunities for others too to get involved, right? And you're making some chaos and they're cleaning it up essentially.
Yeah, well, that's it, right? I mean, I'm at the fun part now of the business model, right? I mean, I started at the beginning when 2009 when we started Pulis Investments. Like I said, my dad and I partnered, and we went off and doubled our portfolio on that side. But in that year, but the part I kind of left out of that story was that one of the agreements my dad made with me, to kind of get him off the bench there and partner with me, was that I promised to manage all of his properties for free. At that time, I was making nothing. I was living at home, and he's like, "Listen, I'm feeding you and I'm housing you, and you want me to be your partner, right?" He's like, "I'm comfortable not being I'm comfortable, doing what I'm doing. So if you want this, feel free to jump on board here and get into the nitty gritty of the business." And at first I him and hawed, and because I mean, everyone knows property management is a hell of a lot of work, and it's not exactly the most glamorous. But I decided to take it on, and that's when we started the company. But man, like at those days, I was sitting there doing everything from taking out the garbage in some of the triplexes where the tenants weren't taking it out to, doing the account management, working on financing, trying to find new buildings, managing all the renovation projects, leasing out all the units, dealing with all the tenant headaches, dealing with all the maintenance issues. You're so busy in the day-to-day operations of these individual buildings and dealing with these tenants that it's so hard to kind of stick your head out from the clouds and see where the new opportunities are and what's coming up and how can you capitalize on that. Where now fortunately we've been able to take a lot of that operational responsibility off of me. Building out the accounting team was a big deal, and the property management team was a massive one. Where now I can stick my head out and I can focus on either networking and or putting myself into situations where I'm around individuals that are in the industry and keenly focused on the next chapter of the real estate investment world and cycle, and then start to follow different trends and try different things. Like one of the new things we're getting into now, because real estate prices have been going crazy on a multifamily level, and cap rates have gone so far down that it's now becoming a really viable option to begin building, right? As long as the provincial government doesn't mess around with the changing of the rent control laws right now, and they keep them as no rent controls being placed on new builds. I finally see it as an opportunity now that is one that we're going to begin taking a lot of action on, and one that I think a lot of guys in my position are really looking at, where 2-3 years ago that it wasn't even a question.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So purpose-built rental units is what you're talking about, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Fantastic. I like that idea. We'll have to have you back on to talk about that once it's off the ground.
Yeah.
What kind of buildings are you buying now then? Is it bigger apartment buildings, or what type of properties are you buying in these these LPs and that sort of thing?
So there's what I'd like to be buying, and then there's what I've had to be buying in the last little bit. So, typically we like to buy buildings that are 40 units to 75 units. I like to be just below what a lot of the big REITs are buying up. So there's a little less competition, but bigger than the average mom and pop can go off and buy themselves. So there was, I use past tense because things have changed in the last few years as the market's gotten so tight. But there was a sweet spot there where it was pretty easy to go off and find buildings. However, because it's been so dire in the acquisition phase of buying multifamilies, and every company is feeling it, we're seeing these big REITs come down to 20, 30, 50 units. And even ourselves, we just bought a 25 unit building that I would never have looked at a year ago. We now had to acquire it. We're sitting on some money. It's a great building. It's going to do well. It's just, we wouldn't normally look to deploy these small amounts of quantity or capital. That we'd look to, buy something a little bigger and more efficiently deploy it. But it's been really dry out there. So kind of got to do what you got to do.
So let's talk about maybe some failures. What were any big failures you've had that you've learned from and people could learn from and hopefully avoid?
You know what? I hate to say it, but there's I haven't really had any failures, knock on wood. I mean, I've had the real failures I've had were, okay, I got one. I started a few years ago, I started a flip division. It was actually as my dad was kind of beginning to retire off. He wanted to take away his day-to-day responsibilities, but didn't want to do nothing either. So we started a little flip company, and I tried to time the market. So we ended up buying a property. It had a 6-month closing. It closed March 2017. And my agent at that time said to me, hey, it was a single family house in Mississauga. He's like, you don't, because we'd had that boom, the winter of 2017. And he's like, we could probably flip this property off for 100 grand more than you bought it. You'll net like 80 grand, say. And, you know, we could sell this right now. In my cockiness and I guess my I don't know what it was, but I said, no, you know what? This market's going to continue to do its thing, and let's sell it. Let's not touch it. We won't renovate it. I like the strategy there, obviously, but let's wait till September. So I got a little greedy here, and I went away to Hawaii with my wife and friends of ours. And midway through the trip, I get a notification from like CTV News or something where Kathleen Wynne had I don't know what it was, a desperate political attempt to do something, but ended up eliminating the rent control laws or changing the rent control laws where forced all the new builds to be rent controlled, and to put in that foreign buyer tax and everything that she did in that one foul swoop. And it just devastated the market there for a little while. So I ended up having to get home. We renovated that building after we waited a year, renovated it, and ended up losing about 200 grand. So the moral of the story is twofold. One, don't get greedy. If you can make money for nothing, do it. Two, you know, as safe as real estate is, one thing I learned is the political risk involved in real estate, right? What if as long as you have long timelines, I mean, it's holding real estate, cash flowing real estate especially, you know, you could weather any storm, whether it be a recession, you know, a slight dip in the market, or political faux pas. But if you're in the flip business or you're in a short-term commitments with investors where you're giving them 5-year commitments or timelines, and you're like, in 5 years, you're going to get your money back, you know, always have clauses or things that will extend that timeline. Because, you know, frankly, real estate doesn't work on fixed timelines, and whatever you think is going to happen might not happen. So always give yourself some extra room there. And on the political risk side, you know, Paul, I think we could all agree at this point that every rule that Kathleen Wynne put in place that day was counterintuitive to the real goal she was trying to solve. But she did it all for political gain. It was going to win her some points. It looked like she was doing something on the short term. And it looked like especially on the short term when real estate prices fell there, it looked like, you know, she was, you know, what she did was correct. But anyone with an economics background of any sort could see that what she did might have had a positive short-term response to her political career, positive, and to these, you know, renters and or home buyers. Again, very short-term, short-sighted view. But on the long term, development of new builds stopped or halted, and especially with the rental products, all of that stopped in its tracks when she did that. So the long-term repercussions of that for everyone now, and here we are, 2020, 2-3 years later, and we're having another huge boom. And it's not because, you know, anything's changed. All the buyers from those few years were still there. They all still need homes. We got how many new immigrants coming in every year and whatnot. Anyways, I can get into a whole story about this, but net, you know, you can never assume that things are going to follow the right course of action and or common sense, especially when it comes to politics. So, you know, always be worried about that on your SWOT analysis sort of thing.
Well, I like the way that you put it in that, you know, if you can make the money for free, do it. Like, I think that would be the key point there, because I don't necessarily think there was anything wrong with your strategy. It just didn't work out based on a circumstance. And it wasn't even trying to really time the market, other than that you knew that typically September would be a good time to sell, right? So,
yeah.
So I really like that you said, yeah, well, if you can take the money for nothing, then do it. And there's a couple of flips that I've done too, where I just went, man, if I had just done nothing, I probably would have made more money.
Exactly. Well, you just don't know. I mean, again, the real point of that is yeah, make money for nothing, because even when you don't see anything, that is going to, you know, I could never have predicted Kathleen Wynne doing what she did at that point, because like I said, it was so counterintuitive to what I thought what the real goals were, right? So, I mean, that just blindsided me way out of left field. And what that taught me, though, was that be prepared for stuff that you can't see coming, right? And always set yourself up as to, you know, with contingencies and or, you know, maybe taking one on the chin and you know, only earning 80 grand on a deal where maybe, yeah, if she didn't do what she did, I could have made 150 if I waited to September. But, you know, sometimes it's better to just take that 80 while you can and not have to, you know, bear the risk of what you can't see coming.
Well, we've heard a lot of good pieces of advice right there, but let's just take the number one piece of advice that you have for somebody interested in getting into real estate investing. Let's do that. That'll wrap us up here.
Do it. A lot of people get into this analysis paralysis, you know, where they sit there and analyze properties and or opportunities to the end of days, and never end up pulling the trigger. And that whole time, you know, these $5,000 or $10,000 they thought they were going to be saving on a property or trying to over negotiate or what have you, you know, they've lost in property value increases over that 6 months or a year or 2 years. That end, don't expand too quickly. So when you go off and buy your first property, try and property manage it yourself. Because if you do, it'll give you the sense of confidence in both the real estate investment, but also you won't feel afraid if your property manager, whoever you do decide to hire down the road, decides to quit or tries to hold you hostage. Because if you know how to manage your properties, you can't be held hostage by anyone because you can always take them over. But by owning and managing your own property, especially for the first year, I always tell individuals who are starting to buy a single family home or buy their first investment property and own it and manage it for a 12-month period. Canada has 4 seasons, and all 4 seasons bring, you know, different personalities out of individuals and buildings alike, right? So you get 12 seasons or 12 months worth of experience and knowledge and understanding how your building and tenants will act in these periods. And then you can go off from that point and begin to buy other assets and begin to grow your portfolio now with a solid foundation. Yeah, that would be the 2 biggest pieces I'd offer to individuals.
Cool. Makes sense to me. It's great advice. Rob, anything else?
No, I think that's good, man. He's shared a lot. I appreciate you coming on, Kyle.
No problem. Thanks a lot for having me.
Yeah, it was great. We haven't talked, you know, maybe down the road we'll talk even further, but we haven't talked that deep on equity, private equity funds, limited partnerships, all that stuff. So
no, we definitely haven't.
Yeah,
so
it's a show in itself. Yeah.
I'm sure there's way more to give us, you know, that people, if you want to learn more, you could probably have to research it a bunch more. There's a little bit there, but there's a ton more underneath that, I'm sure, that come into play.
Yeah, I didn't want to take up the whole show and get too
stuff.
nitty gritty there, but hopefully you got enough.
Awesome. Well, that's pretty much it, Rob. We're going to wrap up.
Sounds good. Okay. Well, everybody, thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.